Scott McNair, injury attorneys, we fight for the win.
All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Overruled podcast brought to you by the Scott Vignair Law Firm. This is your host, David Vignair, along with my co-host, Brad Scott, and we have an exciting guest today, our friend Kyle Crosby, the founder and operator of Louisiana Dread, an online Louisiana history company which has a very active following both on Instagram and on YouTube and really produces some incredible informational content related to Louisiana history, lost stories of different cities and cultures and regions of the state, and also works with us in marketing. So it's an exciting episode for us to have Kyle on. Kyle, welcome to Overruled.
Absolute pleasure, gentlemen. Absolute pleasure.
He's moved from behind the camera to in front the camera. This is quite a shift for him.
We'll see how it goes.
Who's controlling the controls, though? That's the problem.
The first question is, let's just get into it. Kyle, everyone knows you have a gumbo review. And we have a pizza review. We're not going to get into the merits of either of those reviews compared to each other, but we need to know. We are all down the Bayous. I am from Thibodeau, which down the Bayous would not consider down the Bayou. Brad is from Bayou Blue, and you are very much from down the Bayou. So I need to know the three best gumbos. Go.
The Balcony in La Rose, Louisiana.
That's number one.
That's the number one. Then you go a little bit further south and you go Mommy Joe's. Mommy Joe's is really good. But then Chris's Po' Boys in Lafayette. That's a little bit of a drive from here, but it is, it's worth it. It's one of the best bowls of gumbo I've ever had. But again, those are the top three that I mentioned earlier in New Orleans, because most people don't really venture out in New Orleans, out of New Orleans. But, you can't go wrong with the other three.
Now, people have different taste in gumbo. Obviously, there's different types of different ways of making it. So what are you looking for in a gumbo that puts it on top of your list?
Well, the roux color. The roux color has got to be a good consistency. It can't be too thick, can't be thick. You got to have that right blend of everything. It's got to be a good golden brown or a dark brown. You don't want to go too dark, because then you're gonna. And personally, I don't like okra in my gumbo. I think it's slimy. But always, I try to stick to chicken and sausage, because seafood definitely has a different taste to it. And if I'm going to compare gumbos, you got to, be consistent with that. Now, it's funny you mentioned that too, Brad, because there's been wars started in my comment section over like potato salad in, potato salad.
I ask you about that. What's your position on potato salad? This is very controversial.
This is very important to me, by the way.
It's very right.
Very interested in hearing the answer to this.
So
I'm on pins and needles as I sit here, because you are the gumbo reviewer. So go.
It honestly depends, y'all. Like I've eaten
no.
There's a right and wrong way. There's a specific
Pick
answer.
A side.
I have put it in the gumbo and it's been phenomenal. And then I've eaten it outside the gumbo, and it just takes another extra step to scoop the potato salad and scoop the gumbo in. I don't mind putting it in there. In fact, okay, in the gun to my head, I'd say put it.
That's the right answer.
No.
What about you? Okay, I was about to say.
No.
I am really happy right now.
Potato salad does not go in your gumbo, people.
No.
What you're talking about,
No.
okay, doesn't go in the gumbo.
No.
Give me a break.
It's a side dish.
No.
House divided, I see.
The gumbo, and it's actually one of the only times I'll eat mayonnaise is if for potato salad, to put it in the gumbo. If you think about it, all of our grandmas in them back in the day, they do the egg drop in
Not
the
my
gumbo,
grandma.
because that would make Kyle. Why don't you tell the story? Because you know more about Louisiana history than all of us. Why did they put the eggs in the gumbo?
People would put eggs in it. And sometimes it's just like a regular hard-boiled egg, because you're putting everything in the gumbo. You won't put everything in the pot. It makes for a lot more to serve to people, and it fills you up. That's the main goal of it. Back in the day, our ancestors in Acadiana, these Cajuns and Creoles, they just needed to eat to gain a lot of carbs, to be able to keep working and go fishing and to provide for the family. So you need a lot of carbs. You need to be fully fed. And that's pretty much what a gumbo is. A lot of carbs. I've probably gained 500 pounds just by starting this gumbo review, y'all. It's just, I would keep walking around the city just to satiate the gumbo weight that I'm adding. But, that's mainly what it was for, to feed a whole family of like 12. Because back then, these families were massive compared to the ones that we have today. Like I'm an only child. My mama is one of 6. Her mama is one of 12. It kept getting exponentially larger further you go down. So it's just to keep that family fed.
And why Louisiana Dread? Should people be scared? Like, tell us about the name and how the whole thing started.
In 2017, I was living in Los Angeles, and I would go on auditions as an actor, and they would say, that's a great job, but can you try that in an American accent? And I'm like, that was my American accent. So I was essentially writing stories set in Louisiana to be able to record myself and film myself doing things that I know I can do, to make a demo reel and to send to agents. But in that process, a girl I was dating at the time had never seen The Twilight Zone, and her and I were just watching it. And there were like 20-minute episodes, real fun to watch. And I thought, I could come up with 20 stories right off the top of my head without even thinking about Louisiana culture, just like that. And that's exactly what I did. I wrote 10 episodes, each one about 20 minutes to an hour long. And it's a horror anthology series, all based on our culture. Each individual story, it's its own standalone, but it's all based on our culture. There's one about the Rougarou. There's one about the Axeman. There's one about bootleggers and moonshiners. There's one about offshore oil rigs, one about Jean Lafitte, all this kind of stuff, and I wrote this and I called it Louisiana Dread, because these episodes entice the fear and anxiety and dread in people when they watch it. And I'd come back because my dad got sick, and I came back to help take care of him. And I would read him these stories by his hospital bed. And essentially, we would just kind of think like, man, this would be cool if it could get to a wider audience. But I don't know if you ever tried to explain what the Rougarou is to somebody from Wisconsin, or at least try to get them to pronounce it.
Well, I'm not going to name the location, but we had a rather pedestrian pizza not that long ago, and you told me and Brad the story of the Axeman. I think Brad maybe was a stronger Louisiana historian than me, and I didn't realize that he had cut so many people up with their own axes. So I was kind of dreadful myself, if I'm going to be honest about it. That was how many people did he kill?
He only killed 6, but there was about
with their own axes in Gretna.
Yeah, in Gretna, well, all over. There was one uptown. But they're all Italians, all Italian grocers, to be specific.
Maybe they put potato salad in their gumbo, and that's what he had an axe to grind.
He just
They probably put some tomatoes in there.
Fruit there.
We didn't even get into whether or not onions go in the potato salad, which is another rabbit hole that we could go down. But he was never caught, right, Kyle, the Axeman? Like, they still to this day don't know who it was.
No, and the thing is, David, is that he wrote a letter to the Times-Picayune saying that, I am a spirit. You're never going to catch me. The police are going to try to catch me. They're never going to do it. But I'm going to pass over New Orleans again. But this time, if you play in jazz music, you'll be spared. Now, if you're not playing jazz, you're going to get the axe. So that night, it was October 19th, 1919. The entire city just played jazz all night. Like the wealthy people had hired jazz bands to go on their porches, and they invited their friends. The people who couldn't afford that would just flood the dance halls in the city, and jazz played throughout the entire city that night, and nobody died.
Story.
It's a very cool story.
And again, never got caught.
Was it being from down the bayou what entices your history satiation? That's a weird word to use, but you have really, if knowing you as well as I do, I would not have ever guessed if I didn't know that you were such an active reader of Louisiana history. And for those of you who don't know, Kyle reads it all the time, on the weekends, he's reading about Louisiana history. I think obviously now to help your content for Dread, but you genuinely love it. So what kind of
part of you? What sparked it? Yeah,
it was really when my dad got sick. It was mostly stuff I could read to him by the bed, and I would just kind of read on this stuff. And honestly, y'all, I had no idea on a lot of this stuff that I was talking about, and I would give tours throughout the city too, because right when I got back, I didn't have a job. I just, quit everything over there and moved back, and they had tour opportunities out here. So I was like, yeah, I could easily just do a tour to get my bearings, get my feet on the ground here, and then really start developing another career. And I started doing tours, and I just saw the enthusiasm of people. I met people from Mongolia to Arkansas, which not too different, if I'm being honest. They really, really love our culture. And it was that I guess that drive when I'd see, people's face light up and they'd always ask questions. I loved questions. That's what I would tell people on my tours. Look, you could stop me in the middle of me talking. If you have a question or something don't make sense, let me know. I'm going to do my best to explain it. Now, I'm not I don't know everything, but I'll definitely find the answer out for you. And essentially, I just saw the the love in people's eyes of who we are as people and our history and just our culture in general. So it was just more of a drive to do that. Now, then I started looking into our history on the bayou, man, and that blew my mind because, and it's just, I know it's the same thing for y'all. We didn't learn this in school. Like, we didn't learn about the history of each individual town. We didn't learn about the Black lives in our towns either, any of the like indigenous history, any of that. So that was another force to go into and be like, look, these people's stories need to be told just as much as ours. So I just started reading all these different books, and it was fascinating. If anybody's ever looking to doing something like that, you just go to the library. I mean, they got buku books on it. It's great.
And it's such a rich history too. I mean, these stories they're all over the place, and there's so much of it too. So what I enjoy in Louisiana Dread, in addition to the Axemen and stuff like that, is just those history pieces on cities that you go to. Like, I live in Mandeville, live on the North Shore, and you came up there, you did a spot on Mandeville and Madisonville. These things in my backyard that I didn't know the reason for or why it was there. Then Kyle pops up on my phone and social media, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty damn interesting. So, but what's some of the, like, maybe surprises that you've run into, or some backstories that you're like, man, this is really cool? What's some of your favorites?
So I, even like a more closer video, like you mentioned, the Axeman, I didn't realize how much Marrero, of all places, had connections with the Axeman. So the guy's name's Louis Marrero. He was the mayor. He was the sheriff of Jefferson Parish at the time. And his whole platform just kind of derailed because of this Axeman debacle, because he was vehemently just 100% convinced that it was the mafia that was doing it. So he would persecute, just random Italians that were involved in these organized crime families around the city. And when it came out that, it really wasn't them, he went to Charity Hospital at one of the victims after they were attacked. He and his people, Marrero, went and basically were like, hey, you need to say that it's these Italian guys, it's these people that beat you up, essentially. And then it came out. When that came out, nobody really did either. His whole political platform just crumbled because of the Axeman, essentially. So that kind of shocked me. And then even going to the North Shore.
How did you uncover that, by the way? I mean, where do you find that story? How do you get that history out of there?
Jefferson Parish East Bank Library. Shout out to my friend Sal out there. He helped me out with a lot of stuff, especially with Italian history and stuff like that. We've been making a bunch of videos on Italians coming up too in the new year. That's been invaluable resource, is that East Bank Library in Jefferson Parish, right off of Napoleon.
Libraries, and everybody's so quick to get online and Google this stuff. And I don't know if it's even out there, but yeah, I guess we do have like old news stories and print publications that archive these things. That if we go looking for them, maybe we can find them a little bit.
It is now. It's on Google now because we made the video on it. So that's what we're trying to do, just all these little stories that otherwise would just be lost in just oral traditions, or like, for instance, this one's just lost in the back annals of a library, but it's just super interesting. And like stuff on the North Shore, the history of Lacombe. And honestly, I didn't realize that they had a town of Louisburg right where the causeway.
A really cool place.
I blew my mind and the reason I even found that out.
Get off the causeway immediately on your left. It's a whole little neighborhood and little area right there. It's very historic, and Kyle knows more about it than I do, but I stumbled across it, after moving up there, but very interesting.
How many people live in Louisburg?
Not many. It's almost been swallowed.
Lewis and the Bergs.
Lewis and his Bergs.
I think everybody thinks it's just part of Mandeville.
Okay.
Right. And that's what I was looking at, places to film Mandeville, and I was on Google Earth, and I just kind of zoomed in on my phone, and I was like, Louisburg, what is that? And then I just started researching it, and it was wild, man. It was another whole little community. And then like West Louisiana, no man's land. That's the best part about Louisiana Dread, and then Louisiana as a whole, is that it's so diverse. Like, you go from like the Mississippi, as I call it, in Slidell area, to New Orleans, Creole centric, then Cajun country down the bayou. You have Grand Isle, that it's a whole separate thing, and you go a little bit further west, and it's the Wild West cowboys, saloons, gunfights, this kind of stuff. You go further north, you got Bigfoot and all these crazy stories. It's crazy. It's wild. I love it.
But the Lafayettians, I don't think that they would consider. I just made that word up. It's a Louisiana Dread episodes. I'm gonna start making Louisiana words up. The Lafayettians think of them. Knows, so don't they think of themselves as Cajuns? And wouldn't they dispute Southern Terrebonne and Southern Lafourche people considering themselves Cajuns? Like, isn't there
a name right
disagreement there? And I mean, candidly, the Lafayettians' opinion should be somewhat minimized because they put their seasoning on the outside of the shell of the crawfish, which is a stain upon their culture, which they can never recover from.
They do that. That seems like North Louisiana. I didn't know Lafayette does that.
Yeah, it's just
themselves Cajun. Like, isn't there some? I mean, I know, Kyle, of the history of the disputes between the Creoles in New Orleans and the Cajuns of like Southern Lafourche and Terrebonne and all those area. But don't the Lafayette area people also consider themselves to be the real Cajuns? Like, isn't there some struggle there?
Where's the boundaries, Kyle? You're the expert on this.
I am the expert. Yes, but yeah, Vic. Honestly, we all know that one of the biggest banes of Louisiana's existence is for its citizens to classify something and then declassify something else as different than themselves. It's all Cajun. Now there's Prairie Cajun, the ones that grew up in the prairie. And then there's people like us, as Swamp Cajun. We grew up closer towards the swamp in the Chaffalay Basin. They're all Cajun. But there's always going to be somebody in Lafayette who thinks that they
we're not talking on Lafayette, but
no, I'm just using an example. Because unquestionably a Cajun region, no different than Southern Lafourche and Terrebonne. But they're just like, I had a Lafayette friend the other day, like say something like, "Oh, y'all call yourselves Cajuns like Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish." I'm like,
right.
You think you're a Cajun?
Right. It's always somebody like that. And it's like, I'm gonna post this map of real Cajun country, and they don't know. Most of them never even left Youngsville or wherever they're from.
It's easy to figure out. It's where they put their potato salad.
Wow.
I don't know about that, Brad. Oh man,
but do again.
we can't let it go.
You've got people, right, Kyle, from like all over the world following Louisiana Dread. Isn't that neat? Like, where are some of your bigger following bases from?
India. Surprisingly, we have a big Indian population that follow us for how they got. It's really, it blows my mind. That's why sometimes in like the gumbo videos, I'm like, kind of looks like a curry. Wink, shout out my people in India.
He's keyword loading these videos now. Now we see the strategy.
Some SEO.
He's what the biggest demographic population is, and he's going after us.
I mean, it blew my mind when I saw that.
Please run a poll with the Indian people and find out if they would prefer to have their potato salad and their gumbo.
We know the answer to that already, but yes, go ahead and do the poll.
From your following base from India, we want to know from all the people from India if they believe in the potato salad going in the gumbo or not.
Right, we got to. I mean, we have to do a worldwide poll to find out who's really right.
And Australia too, right? Don't you have some people following you from Australia?
I have Australia, obviously France, and the UK. We have a lot in Germany as well, a couple in Senegal and the West African countries. I mostly believe, the West African countries, and then like France is obviously because we make a lot of content as Creoles, because it's all that big blending mixture and stuff. But again, I was shocked to find Australia in there, the UK, and because I've said a lot of damning things about the British because we had a lot of conflicts back in the Gap, and they come here and they try our food and they turn redder than those boxing gloves in front of you because they're not used to the spices. But
they also burned down the White House, which is
a problem. Yeah.
Recently? No, I'm just playing. Yeah, they did.
That would have been problematic if the historian didn't run up. You look surprised by it. I was like, come on, we all know they burned down the White House.
But New Orleans is one of those unique cities. No matter where you go in the world, for the most part, people know New Orleans. There's a lot of interest in New Orleans. And I remember when I first started working downtown when I was a young lawyer, I remember walking outside, I was right across the street from the Superdome, and I'd walk out and I'd see people standing on the street or on the sidewalk looking up in awe, and I'm like, what's going on? Is somebody jumping off a roof or something? And I realized, they're looking at the Superdome. It's just there's people from all over the place. They come in. It's things we take for granted because they're in our culture, our foods, our music, and everything else. But it's things we grow up with that we don't realize it's that interesting to people from around the world. Lots of people travel here. A lot of people make their vacation destination, New Orleans. It's just a very interesting city, full of rich history that you're uncovering, which is really doing a good service to New Orleans and the tourism industry.
I appreciate that.
So,
but don't you think, Kyle, some of that is that New Orleans is really a unique American city from the standpoint of like having preserved a lot more of European architecture and things of that nature that makes it feel like a much different city in the States than others? Absolutely.
New Orleans is the most European American city. It is also the most Caribbean American city. Everybody that would come through, they'd be like, oh, I feel like I'm in the Caribbean. I feel like I'm on like a little island, just by the architecture. I mean, it's Spanish architecture. So it's gonna give that aesthetic right away. But definitely it's unlike any other place in the United States. Absolutely, hands down. I think it was Tennessee Williams that said there's really only 3 great American cities. It's San Francisco, Miami, and New Orleans. Everywhere else is just Cincinnati.
Sorry to those of you listening from Cincinnati. And while we're talking about New Orleans, and by the way, to Kyle's listeners from India and Australia, Cincinnati's they have nice people there, But
no, it's Tennessee Williams that said it, not me.
The Cincinnatans, don't hold it against them. So
look, they got Joe Burrow from us, so
they did
a little bit,
yeah, they did. Kyle, what would you say in New Orleans is like one of the better, aside from gumbo, like one of the better Cajun style restaurants you've been at in the New Orleans region?
If somebody wanted to have the Cajun experience in New Orleans, if they're traveling here for a football game or something, where are you sending them?
So if they're, especially if they're in this general area, I'd tell them to go to Mulat's because they have like the Zydeco bands that's playing. Not a fan of the gumbo that they serve there, but it order something else. And that's what I tell a lot of people at these restaurants that don't have the best gumbo. It's like, that doesn't mean that the restaurant itself is bad. Try something else. Right. I'm just warning you that the gumbo isn't like how we, typically cook it. But Mulat's has a great atmosphere. They play a lot of jazz and Zydeco music while you're eating. It reminds me a lot of Boudreaux and Thibodeau's and Homa. They have all the little the jokes, the Boudreaux and Thibodeau jokes all over the place. It reminds me a lot of that aesthetically. So I'll tell them to go there just to kind of venture out of the French Quarter a little bit. I find that the French Quarter has gotten too commercialized when it comes to food and stuff like that, which is great, and people come from all over the world just to experience that, but also venture out and see the world outside of the French Quarter.
I have one last New Orleans question, and then I'm going to let Brad take over, and this one's an important one. We can't have you on here at the Louisiana history authoritarian from Louisiana Dread and not really delve into New Orleans' importance in the Revolutionary War with Andrew Jackson. You and I had that discussion at lunch, which I was never taught as a kid about the treaty. So you just tell that story, please, because I thought it was fascinating when we talked about that at lunch one day.
So one of the things too, I'm glad you brought that up too, because it kind of irks me because Andrew Jackson, everybody loves him, whatever, but he gets a lot of credit for winning the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. But no mention of the pirates, of the free people of color, of Cajuns, of the Portuguese that all banded together and supplied the men and ammunition. Because without that, the Tennesseans and the Kentuckians would have, tucked tail and ran because they didn't have any of that. But it was Andrew Jackson who gets all the credit for winning the war because he was the general. But it was really Jean Lafitte who supplied everything and was the sole reason that we won. Now, a lot of people say, oh, okay, well, that battle didn't matter because the war was over at that time. Technically, they had already signed the treaty in Paris, ending the war. The British and the United States were at peace, but the commander, General Packenham, who was the head commander of the British Expeditionary Force that invaded New Orleans, had direct orders to still proceed with that invasion. Because had he succeeded, that treaty would have just been torn up, and they would have had the biggest city in the mouth of the Mississippi River. And the Americans would not have had any leg to stand on at that point. Because again, the White House was burned already at that point. Then their major port city is gone. And then America, as we know it, would not have existed had that happened. Because, the British at that time, they weren't really known for their, let's say,
Trustworthiness?
regal tactics. They did what they had to do. And that's essentially what would have happened if it had not been for the Cajuns, the Creoles, the free people of color, the pirates, all on Grand Isle and in St. Bernard Parish and all that, coming together and being like, look, there's a real chance that we'll be under British control, which would not be ideal for these people. So they said, we got to supply the ammunition because they got buku ammo. They're pirates. They smuggle it all over the place. So Andrew Jackson was lucky, very, very lucky that they decided to work together in favor of the Americans. And again, I say this all the time, if it wasn't for the pirates and all, we wouldn't have the United States.
So that battle, which people overlook all the time as being almost irrelevant, really was a keystone of the war really being won and giving us what we have today.
Right. And then everywhere you read, it's Andrew Jackson won this battle. That's it. Let's not talk about it anymore. But if you make a deeper dive, you see what really was the cause and what really happened. And I think, there should be plaques all over the place saying, like, hey, we didn't really like pirates because of what they did, but, they really helped us out here, So I think there should be, more emphasis on, these, and you had slaves, you had, newly freed slaves, you had people just currently enslaved that were fighting, for this American ideal, this American idea of freedom. And, without them, it wouldn't have happened.
I think it's one of the unique ideas about New Orleans too, is that melting pot we talk about all the time, melting pot. New Orleans is a prime example of that. We've had for a long time all types of people, all different types of cultures. In some kind of way, New Orleans has done a really good job of just assimilating everybody and putting everybody together, and everybody living together and getting along really well compared to a lot of other U.S. cities that just never had that kind of success. And even going back to Canal Street and how one side was more French and the other side was Spanish, and we have our street names that change over because of Canal Street, where there was a canal before. But we've always had people live in a symbiotic, kind of harmonious type of environment here in the city, which I think it goes a long way. And that goes to the battle that you're talking about. Everybody was working together, all hands on deck, so to speak.
Have y'all seen the puffy shirt? Have y'all seen the puffy shirt episode from Seinfeld?
No.
Kyle, do you know what episode I'm talking about?
No.
Okay. Well, basically, Jerry got forced to wear a puffy shirt on the Bryant Gumbel Today Show, and he didn't want to be a pirate. So I guess my point was, like, maybe Jerry Seinfeld would have wanted to be a pirate if he didn't know Jean Lafitte's importance in saving the war.
You see, that's why we need more recognition for the pirates.
I know.
Now, you mentioned Grand Isle a couple times. You're from Grand Isle. You were born and raised there. For the people who don't know anything about Grand Isle, give us a little perspective. Where is it at? How big is it? What's going on in Grand Isle?
So technically, just to backpedal a little bit, I'm from Larose, Louisiana, but I grew up, my grandparents lived on Grand Isle, my entire family. I was the only one that my mom and dad moved up the bayou to Larose to bring me so I could go to school up there. But my entire family lives on Grand Isle. It's a 7-mile long island. It's paradise. It's a beautiful, oasis away from city life. Now the beaches aren't that pretty. It's brown water because it's right where the Mississippi River enters into the Gulf, and it churns up all that brown water. So you really can't see your feet when you're in the water. I wouldn't recommend going in there anyway, because God knows what's in there.
Correct.
It's a getaway. It's a retreat. People don't look for people there. It's one good example I could give you. This is like in 2008. I'm 18 years old. Now, the statute of limitations is gone now, so I would go to the bar and I would just sit down. That's a little law thing for y'all.
A little legal lingo.
Legal lingo.
He's catching on.
Right. So, I was 18 and I was just going to the bar, and just my friends and I, we meet this guy, Mr. Gotro. It's just this old man, bald, big white beard, and he'd buy us drinks every now and then. It's like, I just met him randomly. He seemed like a nice guy. And then I'd always see him at the bar. And about a couple months later, it's like, Mr. Gocho's not there anymore. It's like, well, I wonder what happened to him. So I went to talk to Artie. It was back when it was Artie's. I was like, hey, what happened to that old man that used to be here? He goes, man, you'll never believe who that man was. His real name was Whitey Bulger. He was a mafia boss in Massachusetts in the 1980s, killed 19 people, was number 2 on the FBI's most wanted list after Osama bin Laden, and was just hanging out on Grand Isle. His wanted poster was in the post office, and everybody minds their business. You don't go poke around, just live your life, laissez-faire type of thing.
You never know what you're going to find on Grand Isle.
If you never know what you're going to find on Grand Isle. But the FBI, somebody tipped the FBI off, and they warned him. These people said, hey, look, the FBI is coming for you. So he hightailed it to Santa Monica, where he was eventually caught, and he died in jail not that long ago. But you never know what is going to happen. Now,
you just keep driving down Highway 1 until it ends, and that's where people end up.
Yeah. And people they go to get away. Nobody messes with you down there. You can live your life off the grid if you want. But, you have all modern amenities. You have internet, you have grocery stores, you have bars, you have, entertainment. But you can truly live off the grid on an island that's right off the coast. It's great. I love Grand Isle, and I hope, my grandkids get to enjoy it.
Fascinating story. So Kyle, tell us, where can people find more about Louisiana Dread? How can they connect with you and follow you online?
So you go to Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. It's Louisiana Dread, DREAD. We also have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/Louisiana Dread, where there's more exclusive content and more series, like our estate video series that shows you all different old homes in Louisiana. We have a drink series that shows you how to make authentic Louisiana cocktails called Louisiana Drinks. And I like to do that whenever it's like the weekend.
Hopefully a gumbo recipe on there too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's coming up our 100th episode. But yeah, everybody go check out Louisiana Dread.
And before we close the show, Kyle, why don't you go ahead and put you on the spot? Give us maybe like an educational, like Cajun word of the show. Like, can you give us a Cajun French word and what it means?
Let's enrich the knowledge of our viewers here.
Yeah, I'm curious if it may be one that I grew up hearing, but I am an up the bayou, so I'm not really a down the bayou. And people from New Orleans don't get that. They think Thibodeau's down the bayou, but it's a very big misunderstanding on the north side of I-10. But go ahead, give us a Cajun word for the day.
So I'll give you this word. It just popped into my head because it's only said in Lafourche Parish and maybe in Abbeville, but we say "kess" to mean the bed of a truck.
The bed of a truck. I didn't know.
But "kess" actually is like a suitcase, like a travel suitcase. And it was mostly to talk about back in the early 1900s when the Model Ts first came out, the cars. They had a space in the back that you could put your trunk, your briefcase, your big suitcase on and strap it in and say, oh, look, that's where you put the kess. But as cars started growing, as the decades would follow, that little trunk space became the bed of a pickup truck. So that word stayed with it. So, oh, look, that's the kess. And it's like, hey, can I put my beer in your kess? Just load it up. I think that was just fascinating how the word stayed, but the meaning stayed, but it just kind of evolved over time because these cars and the trucks were just getting bigger and bigger.
I've been hearing that word since college at Nichols from people from down the bayou. And so I always thought of the bed of a truck as a kess. And now I have truly been educated on understanding where it came from.
I didn't realize the rest of the world didn't know about kess.
Yep. Yeah, we used to be like, get in the kess with your consons if you're dirty.
Get in the kess, you bunch of couillons. Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been a great show. Kyle Crosby, Louisiana Dread, like he mentioned. Please check him out there on Instagram. Really good YouTube channel with a lot of long form content, incredible Louisiana history content. I know he's got a lot of things planned for next year and with a lot more interesting stories and content coming out. It's a really neat account. They got a really great active following base from around the world. Louisiana Dread, check them out. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Kyle.
No, my pleasure, guys. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, Brad, really good show. Enjoyed talking about Louisiana, as both of us being from Lafourche Parish in southeastern Louisiana. It's been interesting to learn a little bit about the history and whatnot from Kyle.
It's such a great resource too.
I know.
To have him in the office with us and just hear the stories that he's digging up and bringing that stuff back to life, putting it online, things that otherwise would just go to obscurity and get lost in the sands of time.
No doubt. Well, thank you all for listening. We really appreciate you following along. I hope you enjoyed the episode, a little slice of Louisiana history. Check out Louisiana Dread. This has been the Overruled Podcast, brought to you by the Scott Vignier Law Firm. On behalf of myself and my co-host and law partner, Brad Scott, thank you all for listening, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time.
Y'all take care.
Scott Vignier, injury attorneys, we fight for the win.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.